from Germany, moved to Asia. I met him when he was the representative of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in the Philippines. But from there, he then moved to South Asia, heading the regional office, to East and Southeast Asia in Bangkok, heading the regional office. And then he left us and migrated to Latin America, where he's heading the Latin America regional office. And of course, he's going to talk to us about the experiences in Germany. Siege, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rainer. Well, we've heard two really inspirational stories of liberals in government that have really achieved a lot. But when we want to learn something, we sometimes also need to learn to accept failure or to learn from failure. So that's what I can offer from Germany, namely some lessons of the failure of our government, of our coalition government. As you may know, Germany is a parliamentary democracy with proportional representation, which means no party ever gets an absolute majority. We only had that once, so we always have to have coalition governments, and since 1961 we've always had two-party coalitions. But after the last elections in 1921, people had enough of the grand coalition of Social Democrats and Christian Democrats. The Christian Democrats basically self-destructed in infighting, lost the election, and the only viable alternative was then to form a coalition government between the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals. So for the first time at the national level, we had a coalition of three parties, and three very different parties. So you have two parties that are, especially on economic policies, on the left, and us, who are strict market liberals. So this has been difficult for us from the beginning, and a lot of our voters who voted for us for our liberal ideas on the economy were then aghast that we would go into a coalition with leftist parties and make the necessary compromises. So we did, of course, have things in common, and we called the coalition of progress, because we agreed on quite a few legal reforms, modernization of citizenship law, liberalization or modernization of our laws of sexual self-determination, and we also liberalized the use of marijuana. But if we were hoping that that would put the German people into a frame of don't worry, be happy, that didn't work, because there were too many problems. One was legacy problems. In the 16 years of Angela Merkel, basically the country underinvested in its infrastructure, so we were left with crumbling highways, bridges, and especially a totally dysfunctional train service. So we had to put a lot of money into fixing that, and we did, but the results are not yet visible, because it takes a long time to fix and to catch up 16 years of neglect. And not to mention digitalization. Germany is a developing country when it comes to digitalization, and so again we had a lot to catch up. But the more difficult thing was, of course, events, dear friends, events. We had a series of crises, global crises, of course, the Russian colonial war of aggression against Ukraine was the biggest crisis that came practically 5 minutes after the government took power. That through energy markets into turmoil, Germany had been dependent on Russian gas. We got 50% of our gas from Russia, totally irresponsible dependency that our previous government had done. And we needed to correct that immediately. And then later on, we added the war, or the wars now in the Middle East that were triggered by the brutal attack and massacres of Hamas on 7th of October against Israel. That, of course, also touched most of our societies. So that's one thing, and I would argue our government managed the crisis tolerably well, but it did mean that there were a lot of disagreements, and there was a bit the sense in the public of constant infighting. You first had the issue of, can we not run our nuclear power stations a bit longer than planned? to help tide over the energy crisis. So that was a big fight between the Liberals and the Social Democrats on one side and the Greens on the other. Then you have resolved that, and the question is, how strongly do we support Ukraine? The Greens, who basically overcame the pacifist instincts, and the Liberals were all for strong and quick support to Ukraine. The Social Democrats, who have for decades had illusions and an illusionary love affair with Russia, were always hesitant and maybe a little bit, but not so much, and that has been going on since then. So there you had the Greens and the Liberals against the Social Democrats. And then, of course, issues, can't we have a few more social programs for pensioners, for children, where the Liberals have been saying, not so fast, we already have an aging population, we cannot afford all sorts of additional programs, so that pitted the Liberals and against the Social Democrats and the Greens. And as time went on, these infights or these conflicts were managed less and less well. So even when the party leaders had agreed on doing a deal and a compromise, in different cases, then the parliamentary party said, no, we don't accept that. Or sometimes cabinet members didn't accept that and put a veto. So what the public got to see was a spectacle of constant infighting. And decisions that were taken were not implemented, or because everybody was someone was always dragging their feet. So this has been not a very edifying spectacle and made the government rather unpopular. The real crisis, however, started in the beginning of this year, because the Supreme Court had basically taken the money away. During COVID, we had declared an emergency and given the government the right to go into bigger debt, and that meant the constitutional mandate of limited debts, because we have a debt break, a constitutional mandate to limit debt, can be circumvented if you have a crisis. So COVID was a legitimate crisis. The government got the right, okay, we can have additional debt. And there were like 60 billion left over from COVID in additional debt empowerment. And that was used to basically resolve the conflicts over money. And then the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You can't just use money that was meant for a specific crisis to finance your general budget. And so from that onwards, we had a food fight over the budget, because we said we need to go back to the debt break, we need to go back to sound finances, and the Social Democrats and the Greens said, can we not declare another emergency, maybe because of Ukraine, or maybe because of climate change, or but to basically go on as before. Mixed in with that was, of course, an economic crisis. When you look at the economic development in the developed countries, of course, we're green with envy when we hear Ivory Coast growing by 7% per year. We are actually shrinking. We've got 2 years of recession. We're the worst performing rich country. So the question is what to do about it. You can't just ignore it. You need to do something about it to revitalize the economy. And there, of course, you have a clash of philosophies again. The left, the Social Democrats and the Greens want to spend government money supporting specific industries, doling out subsidies. And the Liberals have said, no, we need a radical reform. We need to deregulate. We have far too much bureaucracy. The cost of bureaucracy are extremely high in Germany. We also our tax rates are too high. They're among the highest in Europe, behind Belgium. So we need to do something about, you can say, supply-side economics, about the framework conditions for all businesses, not just for some favored industries that the Chancellor or the Greens favor. And basically, over that disagreement, the government broke apart. I won't bore you with the details of the drama. The journalists now like to tell a story of betrayal and conspiracy, but the basic thing is, we had suggested, after the Supreme Court decision, let's renegotiate our coalition agreement. We need to make a new deal because the financial basis of our deal has gone, and we need to renegotiate and see whether we can continue. And both the Social Democrats and the Greens said, no, we don't need that. the consequence is that we couldn't renegotiate the deal on the fly, on the go, and that came to be, in a sense, a death knell of the government. In fact, the Greens have admitted as much. They said, yeah, we made a mistake there. We should have listened to the Liberals and renegotiated it. Instead, we had a year of infighting, and at the end, the government broke apart. The Chancellor dismissed the Liberal Finance Minister, then the other Liberal ministers, except one left. And now we'll have new elections in February. I think what is problematic is that for German democracy is that a coalition of the center, of the democratic parties, has failed at a moment when our extremists on the left and on the right are rising in popularity. When the far-right party, the AfD, at the moment is around between 15 and 18%, and as we have heard, has already won state elections. On the other hand, there's one chance that if we manage to make this election really about the economy and about the way to combat the economy, and you have in the center two very clear alternatives. One, a market-based alternative that we subscribe to and that the Christian Democrats usually more or less subscribe to as well, and a statist policy that the Greens and the Social Democrats subscribe to. That might actually harm the extremists, especially the far right, because they are confused about their economic policy, and no one believes that they're good stewards, or they'd be good stewards of the economy. So maybe having a strong fight in the center gives us a chance to counter the narrative, those centrist parties are all the same and you need an alternative, you need a radical alternative. That would be the one hope I have. Whether that can be realized, the next weeks will tell. Thank you.